I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. The Democratic National Convention is over, and with a week focused on convincing voters of potential progress, joy, don't forget joy, and optimism over policies and plans, was Vice President Harris able to move the needle at all for herself? Welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call my smart friends up and let you listen along, and I find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. And joining me back on the podcast today is my friend, National Review's senior political correspondent and co-host of the Three Martini Lunch podcast, Jim Geraghty. He has been here before. You were a crowd favorite, and I'm so glad that you are here now. I ran into Jim in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. I did not know about all of his ordeals getting in and out of the building until right before this podcast. I think maybe just tell him the story of the last night.
Sure.
Even though I thought that the convention went pretty smoothly, the weather was excellent. Chicago put on a good show, but getting home was difficult after those nights.
Yeah, and we should point out, it did have an effect on the programming, at least the first night. They may well have wanted Joe Biden to be well after midnight, but apparently delegates were stuck on the security line and actually couldn't get into the arena on time, which is why they delayed the start on Monday night. Third, look, every political convention, for every listener out there, is like the most heavily policed event you're ever going to attend in your life. Huge security, perimeters and all that stuff. You got all the delegates trying to get out all at the same time. They try to get them onto buses. Everybody's trying to call a ride share at the exact same time, which makes it impossible to get one. And then, of course, all the big mucky bucks are traveling out by police motorcades. So
yes, I got caught by the motorcade several times.
Yeah, so getting out of, and we should point out that Republicans had a really smoothly run one in Milwaukee. Everything was downtown. The United Center, terrific arena, lots of legendary Bulls performances there, not really near the rest of downtown. And so everybody's trying to get out and head in the same direction. I ended up renting a bike while on my suit, wearing a suit with my laptop and my backpack and stuff. Listeners could probably look at that guy. This guy does not look like Lance Armstrong. Jim does not sound like a guy who does a lot of, heavy biking. I do it maybe twice a year on vacation. So it's also the first time I've used the bike lanes in a major city. And, I've got cars passing me on both sides and stuff. Live to tell the tale. And thank you for mentioning.
What did you do with the bike when you got to your hotel?
So they have little stations where you punch them in. So it was like a block and a half away. I was able to park it.
Okay.
It was actually relatively inexpensive. So if I'd known that before, I might have had some smoother nights earlier in the week. But
my goodness. Well, you are here, and we're going to go through some politics for everybody. We keep it pretty high level so that we don't get too in the weeds. But I do think one of the things we could talk about is, where does the race stand today? I've seen some polling that shows a little bit of a bump for Harris. It's normal. Everybody seems to get a little bump out of their convention. But it does feel like in the battleground states, we are in a situation with a tied race, or Kamala Harris slightly ahead, but within the margin of error. Is that about right?
Democrats had a lot of reasons to feel that mandatory joy last week. That I felt like a Clockwork Orange, my eyes being forced open to enjoy all the joyousness, all the coconut memes. Aren't you happy, Dana? Yeah, look, they pretty much since Biden dropped out, a lot of things have broken their way exactly the way they would have wanted it to. The Walz rollout, all we know about him is this good homespun football coach. We don't know about the fact that he didn't send out the National Guard for a day and a half when the George Floyd riots started and stuff like that. The convention, look, it was a well-oiled machine in terms of putting on exactly the performance and exactly the image they wanted to project. What should make Democrats nervous is they've had about a month of just about as good coverage as you possibly could get. No Harris interviews, no Harris press conferences, and it's still pretty much a tie race. And, there aren't any of these swing states where you'd say, she's put it away. She definitely made up the gap. And Joe Biden, particularly post-debate, was a really weak candidate, metaphorically and perhaps literally one foot in the grave. And we have instead, a Democratic candidate who can work early morning hours, work late evening hours, do more than one event a day. Yeah. And that helps. And so they're in great shape, except she's not really ahead in a lot of places. Or if she is, it's margin of error. And,
You imagine the puffery of the media coverage that she's received so far, and it's still tied.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would point out is that it does get harder from here. for both candidates, I think. That's why we start today, Monday, August 26th, with a debate about the debate. That debate's supposed to happen on September 10th. The details of that debate were worked out between the Trump and the Biden campaigns. It was basically the same rules as the CNN debate from June 27th. Kamala Harris wants to reopen the negotiation, and she wants, instead of the mics to be muted while the other person is speaking, she wants the mics to be open, presumably because she assumes that she will be able to catch Donald Trump in a moment of interrupting her or saying something under his breath that she could point out to, where she could point to him and say, "Excuse me, I'm speaking," as she did to the Palestinian protesters. And she was kind of given a lot of at least mild praise for doing that. But I do think it gets a little bit harder for both of them from here. Kamala Harris said she would do a big media interview before the end of the month. The clock is ticking. President Trump was taking questions today, even after doing a ceremony for the 13 fallen service officers in Abbey Gate, Afghanistan. And he was at Arlington National Cemetery doing that. Then he went on to campaign in a Vietnamese area of Arlington, which you probably know well. Jim, I know that you live in the area. So Trump's out there on the campaign trail. Kamala Harris will be there as well. And we still don't know if this debate will actually happen on the 10th.
Yeah. Starting with the debate, let's point out, for a long portion of the history, including both Bush campaigns, it was 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate. We had a really good system that worked. Now, we could argue about the moderators, we could argue about this, that, and the other thing, but basically, it was considered to be normal. Now, last time, they didn't have that 3rd debate because Trump caught COVID and they couldn't work out when they were going to do the 3rd one. But when Biden accepted the Trump challenge, says, "I'll even do it twice." No, you'll only do it twice. 3 is normal. You're actually trying to avoid this. Right now, the message from the Kamala Harris campaign is she'll do 1, and then we'll see, which is a formula for us to have only 2 debates and only 1 between the 2 people who are actually going to be on the ballot, which I think stinks to high heaven. I assume we'll get a vice presidential debate between Walz and Vance.
I think that's scheduled for October 1.
Yeah. But wouldn't it seem weird that would be the last debate, that we wouldn't get another presidential debate between then and election? Oh, by the way,
there's a lot weird with this election schedule.
Early voting starts in Pennsylvania September 16th. So
it starts in North Carolina September 6th.
Yeah. So we are
before
talking
that debate.
Yeah. Now, the people who vote on the first day are probably the diehards. They were never really up in the air. But nonetheless, it does seem rather absurd that clearly the Harris campaign approach is to kick the can down the road, run out the clock, and minimize the number of times she answers questions about it. Because when she does, it generally doesn't go well. The one serious policy rollout she's done so far is, I'm going to have the federal government set prices at your grocery store. And even liberal economists, even, Obama economists are like, no, that's not what you want to do. That never works out well. That's
they're trying to backpedal. On Capitol Hill, the Democrats that were interviewed were like, no, we don't think so. Nope. And also the grocery store owners and managers are furious.
Understandably.
They're being accused of gouging their fellow Americans when actually inflation was a problem for them because it was a problem for everybody.
Right. Do you think that, the fuel got more expensive to bring the stuff to the store? You think maybe that had a factor in it? Minimum wage increases, wages going up across the board. You think that increased prices any? So, and for those
don't
wondering,
forget regulations.
Yeah, this is not crazy right-wingers, Jim and Dana speculate. This is right in Politico, quoting congressional Democrats trying to reassure their wealthy donors and allies who are like, whoa. We're pretty darn liberal, but bread law, price controls has never worked out well. And the message, don't worry, it's never going to happen. We don't have the votes.
I know. I think that's one of the things that's very, very frustrating. And who was I reading? I think it might have been Matthew Hennessy. Yes, Matthew Hennessy from the Wall Street Journal. He wrote a piece that said, there are limits to the fantastical claims Americans will believe. You can tell me as many times as you want that Donald Trump reads for fun, or that Kamala Harris is a flag-waving patriot. When I feel like retching, I know I'm being spun. And he's just saying that they're trying to tell us things that are just obviously not true based on our lived experience and based on things that Kamala Harris had said in the past. I did think it was interesting that at the convention, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, very liberal, very left-wing, she got a gigantic and long, sustained a round of applause, standing ovation at the convention, to the point that she got tears in her eyes from the adoration and begged them to stop talking so she could get her words in. And yet the policies of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders that Kamala Harris has glommed onto are the very ones that are hurting her and keeping this race tied.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you want to look at who's staffing the current Biden, oh, by the way, for listeners, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. I know it's very easy to forget that. He only does about public appearances once a week or so. And then they shuffle him off somewhere after that. But if you look at who's in the Biden administration, a lot of them worked in Elizabeth Warren's Senate office, and a lot of them worked on Senator Warren's campaign.
It was part of the deal.
They didn't get the Elizabeth Warren presidency, but they got as close to it as they could have gotten.
They sure did. They really got a deal. Bernie Sanders said, okay, I'll send you all my staffers. And they're at the Labor Department, at the FTC, the Commerce Department, Treasury. They're everywhere.
I say personnel is policy, as they used to say back in the Reagan
Yes, that's why Chapter 2 of Decision Points that President Bush wrote is personnel. Yeah. The most important decisions that you'll make are the people that you hire.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why did Joe Biden, who is allegedly a centrist, not turn out to be such a centrist, well, a big reason is the people who are surrounding him.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't mean to.
I wanted to ask you about RFK Jr. because that was news over the weekend that RFK Jr., obviously of the Kennedy family, obviously the big Democratic family, ended his flailing third-party bid and put his full endorsement behind Donald Trump, saying that he will be campaigning for him. Donald Trump said there was no promise of a cabinet position or anything, but sort of remains to be seen how much and how visible the Trump campaign will be in utilizing RFK Jr. I thought RFK Jr. had a decent interview with Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday. I do wonder, though, how much do you, Jim Geraghty, think this will matter? And maybe let's just think about those battleground states where he's on the ballot.
If you're Trump, you'd definitely rather have it than not have it. When Harris took over as the nominee, in a bunch of polls, both swing states and in nationally, Kennedy was around 8, 9, 10%. She took over. Clearly, there were a chunk of his supporters who were frustrated Democrats who didn't want to vote for Biden. Harris comes in, they're fine with it, and he gets down to about 4, 5, 6% in most of these polls. I would suspect that a good chunk of that 4, 5, 6% is going to go in the Trump pile in the coming weeks. And that could be a difference. A lot of these states are very close, where 1%, 2% might be enough to help Trump win a race he was otherwise going to lose. Mm-hmm. That having been said, this is not an earthquake in the race. And I should point out, I was reassured to hear that Kennedy was not promised any position in the Trump cabinet. One of the rumors had been CIA director. I guess he was finally going to release all the files about the assassination of his uncle.
We'll finally get the truth.
Yeah, and Dana, look, I feel like I was misheard. I said I really wanted a CIA director who would be tough on the Russian bear. Not just that any old bear. Yeah, exactly.
I thought, Jim, reading you last week, I read you on National Review every day. I read you on X. I read you everywhere I can. And your take on Governor Tim Walz is very interesting. I don't know how you know so much about him, and maybe we can learn that here. I did think James Hohmann of the Washington Post had a great point today. His headline was, Kamala Harris thought she needed Governor Walz on her ticket, but who she really needed was Representative Walz before he became governor and went so far to the left. So in just a few minutes, could you just explain, how do you know so much about the person who would become the vice president and your thoughts about his past and the things that he said and his policies?
Yeah. Espionage and stalkers is step one. No, somewhat more seriously, it's like relentless Googling and probably obsessive compulsive workaholism and just wanting to go back and check all these things. Yeah. Hohmann made the point, and I went back to check the voting records. So you can make an argument that Tim Walz, as a congressman, was in this more on the more centrist side of the Democratic House members for that time period. Now, if you're a conservative like me, he's not. He's still pretty darn liberal. But there were some interesting votes in there. He did vote to hold Eric Holder in contempt. Kind of interesting, since Holder's playing a role in the Harris campaign. A couple other,
and he did the vetting, right?
Yeah, he was A+.
Holder did the vetting.
Yeah, no grudges held there. I was waiting for Holder to pull a Cheney and say, "Yeah, all these guys stink. I'm the best option you got." But he was rated A+ by the NRA. And then you look at what he has as governor. And by the way, I think it was very revealing that in his speech, which was look, I'm not a fan of the guy, but I think it was well delivered. Almost every speech at the DNC was twice as long as it needed to be. And the fact that Walz's was relatively short, I think it was like 18 minutes, 19 minutes or something, gave it a momentum that the other speeches didn't have. But you notice he didn't mention a thing about the George Floyd riots, which seems like kind of a big deal when you're the governor of Minnesota. Like, it's probably the biggest and most consequential event. And there's a lot you could say about those riots, but a big part of it, particularly when you're looking at Walz's decision-making, is that the rioting started on one night and he didn't send out the National Guard for 36 hours. And a lot of the city burned, and a good chunk of the city burned during that time period. And the mayor, look, I totally expect some local state government finger pointing about whose fault it is. But Mayor Frey is like, look, I put in the request for the National Guard as soon as we saw rioting going on, and it took a day and a half for the governor to do it. And want to talk about this was, there were people who came out and said this response was a failure. The police were not there. The fire departments were there. People were hiding in their homes. And if you think I'm being harsh, I'm quoting Tim Walz and his assessment afterwards. Like, he's the one who says the response to this was a failure. And like, this seems like, look, if God forbid, I hope Kamala Harris.
You mean you're quoting the mayor?
Yeah, no, I'm quoting Tim Walz.
Oh, Tim Walz
in his actual, his assessment. Mistakes were made. Whoopsie.
Sorry.
This is unacceptable. The hot dog meme. We're all looking to see who got that, who's responsible for this. That's Tim Walz there. And
we interviewed a woman who, after several months, reopened her coffee shop and was arrested. She's a grandmother of 8 grandchildren. She said they couldn't survive anymore. They had to make money. So she reopened her coffee shop and he put her in jail.
Yeah, that's the crime he's tough on.
60 days.
Rioters, we can't do anything about that, but you opened up your coffee shop in a way we didn't like.
But Tim Walz had a decent speech at the convention, and he did what he had to do. And I said, I think that he'll prove to be a decent wingman for her in this campaign.
Yeah, and look, yes, he is very much helped by media coverage that really wants to portray him as one part the coach from Hoosiers, one part red green, and one part a Wilford Brimley character. And the job of the Republican campaign, certainly I'm trying to do my part in conservative media. We'll see if it's doing any good. I have this much influence over what happens in the presidential election. This is where it'd be really good if you had a Republican president or a Republican presidential nominee and vice presidential nominee who could spell out these things in detail and say, hey, remember the George Floyd riots, America? Didn't it seem weird that it took so long for the National Guard to get called out? Hey, whose call was that? Mm-hmm. And put it out that directly. Put out the largest COVID scam the entire nation took place in Minnesota with the state government. There are a whole bunch of scandals in Minnesota state government about waste, fraud, mismanagement.
Especially even COVID funds.
Yes. And it's one of those things where my suspicion is Tim Walz pro waste, fraud, and mismanagement? No, but he's like a sleepy bank guard. The state government is just a giant pile of money, and everybody's going to try to get what they can. And he's asleep at the wheel. My other suspicion is that people in the Minnesota Democrats don't really mind that because the money ends up taken by their political allies.
Yep. Okay. Moving on from Tim Walz, just for the last section of this segment, I wanted to ask you about is President Joe Biden. He is still the president. Kamala Harris is not the president. You had a thwarted attack from Hezbollah on Israel this weekend, and it was very serious. Mm-hmm. The United States did participate to help take out some rocket launchers before they could destroy or kill people in Tel Aviv. However, President Biden was not seen. He spent a week on the beach in California. He flew home over the weekend. He will spend this week on the beach in Delaware. And God bless. I mean, I love the beach. And his spokesperson put out a statement that said, the president has been fully briefed. He's being kept aware of the situation. And of course, you had Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor in Canada. I think Antony Blinken is probably still in the region somewhere working on the diplomatic effort. But is it strange to have a commander-in-chief in this situation?
He made one appearance last week, and it was the Democratic Convention appearance, which was after midnight. So I'll cut him some slack the next day if he doesn't want to appear in public and he's feeling tired. There's the flaming oil tanker in the Red Sea, thanks to the Houthis. Today's Morning Jolt that's one of the lead items, and I was just pointing out that the last time Biden made any significant remarks about the Houthis was in January. Now, these attacks on international shipping have been occurring all year long. It just hasn't been important enough for the president to talk about, look, he can only work from 10 to 4. Those are the good hours. But this is reported in the New York Times. This is not crazy right-wing conspiracy theories that Biden only has a certain number of good hours in the day. When we don't see him for the better part of a week, I start wondering if he has any good hours. Think about it. He's made 3 or 4 appearances since the COVID diagnosis before his resignation. His speech to the country about it was about 11 minutes long and had one fleeting reference to uniting my party. Think about it. He's never really I did not like his remarks at the convention to begin with, but you think about it. He could have given a speech that would have been, America, I really love. He had one good section where he says, I love being your president, but I love my country more. And if he stretched that out, we know this had to have been an extremely hard decision for him. Our suspicion is that Nancy Pelosi was twisting his arm behind his back and putting his head in the toilet and saying, you're going to resign, and that was what forced his hand on this. But assuming it wasn't that, or assuming he wanted to tell the story of why he's choosing not to run for another, that could have been very powerful. But I suspect we got 2 sentences on it. And my sneaking suspicion is it's because he was forced to, not because he wanted to.
Because you brought it up, could you just, I think your tweets right now are excellent about the ecological disaster.
Oh, yeah.
In the Red Sea, if you could just mention that to everybody, because where are the greenies, gluing their hands to the Van Gogh over this situation?
Yes. So, listeners probably know the Houthis, a whole bunch of crazy Islamists in Yemen who brought back slavery, by the way. Hey, remember, do you think that would be enough to get people up in arms about this? The U.S. Navy is actually engaged in what they describe as the most intense warfare since World War II, attempting to protect the various tankers that go through this. The Red Sea is an extremely important shipping lane because if you don't go through there, you got to go all the way around Africa to reach, either places in Europe or in America. And the Houthis have been firing rockets and drones really since October 7th. And they hit a oil tanker. The oil tanker had to be abandoned, and they're continuing to shoot at it. And it has the capacity. It's already spilled a bunch of oil and has the capacity to do 4 or 5 times the effect of the Exxon Valdez. Now, I thought this is the sort of thing where, Dana, what kind of environmentalism do I support? Killing the Houthis. That's the way I want to defend Mother Earth. I want to,
Right.
The environmentalists, you can't find a peep about them about this. And
it's amazing.
It's one of in the end, most American environmentalists, that would get up in the morning and they want to give you grief about your Big Mac. They want to give you grief about your SUV. They want to give you grief about your air conditioning. And to paraphrase Charlton Heston, you will take my air conditioning from me, from my cold or very cool dead hand.
Today, there's a New York Times article about how heat kills people, but that the statistics are really hard to compile. Mm-hmm. And the people who die from cold, it's higher than the number of people who die from heat. Mm-hmm. But this article was trying to say that, well, actually, we don't know that because the way that people die from heat is different, et cetera. But I thought nowhere in the article does it say, therefore, we should advocate for more people to have access to affordable electricity and air conditioning.
Exactly.
That was not in the article, Jim.
I was going to say my attitude, but I find it very plausible. Lots of old people get heat stroke. It's bad for their circulatory system, their respiratory system, all that stuff. So I find it very plausible that, intense heat in summers can, be deleterious to people who are poor, elderly, immunocompromised, things like that. But to me, it's okay, let's make sure they have air conditioning. And everyone's no, you can't do that because that uses electricity.
You can't do that
either.
Yeah. I'll tell you where they had air conditioning. Yeah. In Chicago.
Yes.
I was freezing. It was miserable in terms of inside. It was cold. Outside, it was lovely. Let me take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we are back with Perina on Politics. Jim, I wanted to ask you just basically 2 questions in this one. Mm-hmm. One about economic policies and the second about shorter campaigns. On economics. So I listened to the daily podcast this morning. That's the New York Times offering. Mm-hmm. I tend to listen to it most days, actually. But today, I found myself so frustrated, not with the reporter. I thought he did a very good job of setting out what Trump is saying on the economy and what Kamala Harris is saying on the economy, using their own words so that people could come to their own conclusions. He also made the point that the Democrats are walking away from Kamala Harris's ridiculous idea to control grocery prices, etc. Talked a lot about tariffs on the Trump side, on and on. And I finished this podcast and I thought, I have never been more of a free market absolutist than at this moment. I feel like all of this crazy manipulation through the government to try to engineer the perfect economy is making everything worse. And I don't think any of the tinkering on either side is going to make it better. And I wonder if you can tell me if I'm absolutely correct.
As always, Dana, you are absolutely correct. But to keep this answer, otherwise this answer would be very short. So I'll just point out, first of all, Trump's 10% across the board tariff on everything imported, that's a terrible idea. That's going to make everything much more, particularly if you want to fight high prices, that's a terrible idea. Because It's not just the stuff that we import from overseas. Think about how many things in America are made with parts or components or some stuff that they need, raw materials that are imported from overseas, right? So that by itself. But the problem is the Biden campaign is Biden or Harris are less than ideal because they kept pretty much all of Trump's tariffs in place. And they're by no means free traders. And then, of course, on top of that, she wants to do price controls and other, statist responses to this. I will point out, though, as we point to this from the yearning for economic freedom, from the frustrations some of us on the more traditional Reaganite side have had with the nationalist right. The argument is like, look, we can't be free traders anymore. We can't be laissez-faire. We can't be small government types because we need to give ground on that. Oh, we can't be hawks anymore. We have to be isolationists. We can't be as interventionist as we used to be. But we have to do that so we can preserve the parts of conservatism we like, which are social conservatism. Oh, by the way, Trump just said he's going to have a terrific presidency for women's reproductive freedoms. So we're giving up on hawkishness. We're giving up on trade. We're giving up on small government. And we're giving up on Where's the upside? Where's the good stuff? Where's the part that I'm supposed to like as a traditional conservative?
I don't know.
Nobody cares anymore.
I got to tell you, I care. I also wanted to ask you this, though. Given what Harris is about to do in, I guess, 80 days or 90 days that she's running for office, is there something to be said for shorter campaigns in America? Yes.
And the schedules for the early primaries and caucuses, they've been at January for a while now. And I think it's going to be very tough to push that back. If I remember correctly, wasn't it 2008? They actually were like late December or something. Either way, and you had a lot of people who were announcing their campaigns in January of the year before the contest started. Trump, if you'll recall, announced his campaign like a week or two after the midterms. So it was like November.
Well, You're reminding me, Kamala Harris announced in February of 2019.
Yeah. So in other words, we're talking 2 years and change for these presidential campaigns, which is ludicrously absurd. And the irony is that the primaries don't really when you announce in January of 2 years ahead of a presidential election, well, then you have to pay salaries for an entire year. If you wait until May, June, maybe you have your money will go a little bit further that way. So this is a bad campaign, or a bad trend. And yet every campaign is convinced, well, I'll get an early start and that'll give me the advantage. I believe
I don't think it does.
No,
because I don't think that Kamala Harris, as Kamala Harris herself, could have emerged a winner in a competitive primary this year as a centrist Democrat to take on Donald Trump in the fall. That just couldn't have happened.
The other thing which I thought was one of the most shocking lines in the convention address she gave was, as a decades-long experienced person in law enforcement, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, after my decades of experience in law enforcement, where did this come from? Remember all the arguments about Kamala was a cop back in 2019? And, I'm a progressive prosecutor. Look, in 2019 and 2020 were probably the absolute worst years to be a career prosecutor and running for the Democratic nomination for president or vice president. And as a result of it, Harris had to spend a good chunk of it running away from her life's work. Now I think we see, the Democratic Party has recognized, we can't abolish the police. That would not work. Okay, that's bad. And now she can be much more comfortable with what she spent most of her life doing. And I think it's, I think on policy, I think it's better. I think it's better that the Democrats have realized this. I don't think they've suffered enough for having such an asinine idea, but unfortunately, politicians really do.
I just think it lurks beneath.
Oh yeah, the first moment there's another police controversy, they'll flip back. The same way, I keep getting told by former colleagues who I think very well of, named name rhymes with Shmevich Schmench, telling me that Harris is going to be so much better for Ukraine. Boy, if she's elected, I hope that's the case. But she's always been out there articulating Biden's vision on foreign policy.
Which hasn't been good.
The Democratic Party's hawkishness on Ukraine strikes me as being about a mile wide and an inch deep. And the moment that turns into a political headache for them, I think all of these post-Vietnam devilish instincts are going to come right back. So, look, keep in mind, Democrats are not angry with Donald Trump for associating with Vladimir Putin. They're angry at Vladimir Putin for associating with Donald Trump. That's the root of evil. That's where it's really bad.
Hashtag never forget. All right, we'll be right back. And welcome back to Perino on Politics. Jim, quick segment here. What am I missing? What do you pay attention to as we head into Labor Day and 70 days to go until the election?
Well, I do feel like the way the Trump campaign has operated since the switch, it's not been a disciplined campaign. It has not focused on the messages that are most effective. And for those, wondering, absolutely the border and immigration is one of the most effective ones. The economy, cost of living, by far, everybody feels it. And the third one is Kamala Harris is a San Francisco liberal, but you have to explain what her stances are that make her a San Francisco liberal. The whole, I didn't know she was black, biracial stuff, nobody cares about that stuff. Willie Brown stuff, nobody cares. It's not that nobody cares. Nobody's going to admit that they're voting against Kamala Harris because of that stuff. So there's a message that can be very effective, but just so far we haven't seen that from Donald Trump. I wonder if there's some other black swan or unforeseen event that's going to happen between now and, let's say, mid-October, because we talked about early voting earlier in this podcast, a terrorist attack. Economic crash or Wall Street crash. We kind of a small preview of that, but then the market rebounded within a day or two. Is there some other factor in here that we aren't really thinking about that is going to have Americans rethinking their choices between now and November? I don't know. I just know that counting on, things will stay the same. Things very rarely stay the same, particularly at a time of year like this, particularly the state of the world being what it is. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I have a new assistant that's starting because Caroline, my previous assistant, she's having a baby any day. Okay. And Kate's first day on the job of training was the night of the Biden-Trump debate. So it's been 35 days and so much has changed and we've got 70 to go. So you could see this twice over between now and then.
More than your listeners want to know, but my wife noticed that I was starting to get up early. And the first thing I would do, even before I put my contacts in, is look at my cell phone, squinting. And she's like, "Are you nervous? What's going on?" And I was like, "What's happened in the last month? Biden dropped out or they have a huge debate. Biden is stumbling and mumbling and bumbling. They switch him out. The Vance pick was something of a surprise. The Walz pick was something of a surprise.
Trump got shot.
Well, Trump got shot. But there's a statement about how much you forgot.
Yeah.
And just kind of this like what's going to happen next, and kind of this sense of trying to stay on top of these things and try to help.
I will say this, Jim. At least it's interesting.
Oh, heck yeah. No, this is better than the previous 6 months. Yes.
It is. Jim Geraghty of National Review and the wonderful 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Thank you so much.
Always enjoy it, Dana. Anytime.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.